This morning I finished reading Garth Greenwell's new novel, Small Rain. I'm a singer. I sing in a choir, and I'm warming up my voice this morning by making this vlog. I kept notes while reading on this little piece of lined paper. If you open it up, there's a little more. I wrote on this other side too. Toward the end, they started getting weirdly aligned. I'm getting warmed up. I'm trying to undull myself to the luck I had in finding this book. The title of the book actually comes from a song that's sung, that the narrator remembers singing. Though the New York Times review got several things wrong and had some swings and misses, it got that right. If you look at this passage, there are some insights to glean. The small rain down can rain, a sentence with a broken back. From the New Yorker review, Payne even unpicks the elaborate tone. Gone is Greenwell's glittering ceremony, the long sentences tinkling with semicolons. Commas are inserted casually, idiosyncratically. A sentence with a broken back. Sentences that hold a lot of weight. The poem goes on, the second half makes an easier kind of sense. This whole passage about west-drawn wind would be a good place to start if you're trying to describe how the style works on you in this book. All the way down to the charming vulnerability of revealing that Renaissance polyphony sounds to the narrator like a rose blooming in time-lapse photography, even though the narrator is embarrassed by that image. These are just scattered thoughts about the book Small Rain by Garth Greenwell. I know about those reviews I cited because I know that Greenwell made a post on Another Green World. Wait, what's the name of the... No, that's Brian Eno. To a Green Thought is the name of Garth Greenwell's Substack. And I'm only just now realizing that it has the word green in it, and that's one of the reasons why that title's appropriate. But I know that there's a post on that Substack where he talks about receiving the negative, sort of tossed off New York Times review, and there's also this kind of positive, thoughtful New Yorker review. So that's how I know about these reviews. I haven't actually read that Substack piece because I haven't actually paid to subscribe yet, but then I also, but I have read the New York Times thing because somebody sent it to me. I asked for a link from a subscriber and they gave it to me. While reading this book, I thought often of this early passage about how new chambers get made in people by art, and I just made the somewhat obvious note that if you have a dissection, that also kind of opens up new chambers in you for worse. But I guess because that injury takes you to the hospital and you have all of these wonderful elaborated experiences and relationships with the people there, it's not such a bad thing after all. It says here in pencil, C-178. The long passage about the George Oppen poem, that's where this lands us, page 178. And here we talk about how poems can create new spaces in our interiors sometimes, not just giving language to something that was mute before, but generating something new. So that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly one of the things, that's totally one of the things that would remind me of that earlier passage about opening new chambers. I'll point out that I'm talking about Garth Greenwell's novel Small Rain on a day when it is raining and is expected to rain basically all day. There haven't really been many small rains lately here in Madison. It's been like periods of nothing and then periods of dumping all over us. A small constant rain might be an alternative to this model of nothing disaster, a kind of equilibrium represented by small rain. A kind of constancy. A small rain of unremarkable moments that, nourish. Reviews are quoting this passage. Why should only suffering be a veil of soul-making? Why shouldn't the soul be made of this moment too, this unremarkable moment? Remember this. Remembering all the little tiny small raindrops, like remembering all the little things said and done and seen in a remarkable, if banal, environment. Like this seems like a pretty obvious interpretation of small rain. It was actually my first interpretation of small rain. I thought small rain would describe the kind of constant, vigilant, small rain of notable moments that rains down on a writer of anything close to autofiction. No matter what prefix you put on fiction, these are fictions, and Garth Greenwell is eloquent about describing how they must be fictions because there are just so many inventions, even if they do use fact-checkable facts. To quickly recap the reading history that I gave in the video that I did for Cleanness, first I read What Belongs to You back in like 2017, then Cleanness a good bit after it was released. Like, I don't think I read it until 2023, which is strange. I was wondering about that while I was reading Small Rain. And then this week, luckily in the beautiful hardcover, Small Rain. I'll add a note that Garth Greenwell's appearances on the Bookworm podcast with Michael Silverblatt are also really bolstering of any love you might already have for him, because to hear him read is very illuminating about what the style signifies, how it interacts with breath, how it conveys, how it's connected to a sense of brokenness, or kind of being at a limit or at an extremity. Could he be longing for death, I would ask them, is he at that pitch of extremity? Is he at that pitch of extremity? Extremes of emotion are depicted in this book. Actually fearing death, actually fearing making people dislike you in the hospital setting, realizing that you've achieved a long-standing, solid relationship with someone you love. But I think the financial panic is an interesting place to go next. The love story in the book is interwoven with a home improvement and kind of a home decimation story, where a house is selected by the lovers, and it is dressed up by them and fixed and reframed, and it also runs into a disaster. It gets hit by a storm, and all of this is, I would say, it's at kind of a pitch of extremity. It's just it's pretty far out stuff to imagine. Basically just the stuff that anybody who owns anything goes through, I guess. Feeling stupid for having owned it, then suddenly feeling pride, and then occasionally feeling like the entire world is just pulled out from under them whenever anything goes wrong. And something does go wrong. There are logs that scatter through the yard. I really want you to read the part in this where people are gawking at the logs that scatter, that litter the lawn. Though absolutely everything I'm saying in this review basically sounds like bad jacket copy, it really is the love illuminated by the hardship, the upswings and downswings, mostly downswings of things like this kind of home ownership thing, that are worth your while reading. Yeah, mostly downswings, mostly of very large branches through roofs. If it's not clear yet, I really love this author, and I enjoyed reading this book so much. I was lost in it for days. People said that it was like I was just in it for days, and they could tell my head was in this world, in the world of the book. And it's a world. It's such a, the author is a good artist because the book is its own little world. It strikes me now that it would be really great if I could talk to somebody else about Small Rain, maybe somebody with a contravening opinion on some level, to kind of undercut the monovocal booktube quality of my videos that might be like the narrator of this book's feelings toward the monovocal or monoglot Midwest. As with many of my favorite books, reading this book will cause you to keep your diary more assiduously while you're suspended in its psychedelic tincture. It will also maybe cause you to start thinking about, making a first draft of that will. That will you've always thought of writing, but, haven't really got around to till now. This whole late passage that all the reviews are talking about, the passage about the Snickers bar, and the YouTube video of the people talking about how you can't wonder at everything, that culminates in this phrase, the only vision of life we can bear is a lie. This passage is good for calling out this book's psychedelic effect. It's all very vivid. When you're reading it, you are very vividly experiencing arriving at a hospital, being a wonder to the people who receive you there, all of the different things that happen in the book, all of the conversations with colleagues, with your sister, and so forth, with contractors, everything, just experiences in the shower are so vivid that they're very enjoyable, and you really do feel a sense of kind of sloughing off your own exterior and adopting the narrator's own. And it's a more pleasant experience than that sentence would have you believe. Yeah, psychedelics. Psychedelics, somebody who's done them told me that they really like awaken you to things around you. They give you this kind of constant sense of wonderment in everything that's absolutely unsustainable as a way of life, but is useful, I guess, to people who dip into that psychedelic world. And my only response had to be, that's very much the effect of reading Small Rain on me, of reading Garth Greenwell's prose in general. And maybe I do seek out people who are like this. I remember when I was reading it, I was making comparisons to Nicholson Baker. Even though that's kind of like a maybe not a lot of people are making that comparison, but as you all know, as watchers of the channel, I love that writer, and that's another writer who has a psychedelic effect on me, and it's unsustainable. When I go away from those books, I want to make a note of everything. I want to, to use the Sebaldian phrase, stuff in my pockets everything that I can, every last thing that I can see around me that might be notable or might be significant in the context of fiction. And I really adore that feeling, or I really crave it, or I really cherish it, because it makes me feel like an artist. It makes me feel like I'm gathering things that might be useful, and it leads to more pages full of text that later might delight me. But I understand that it's not totally sustainable all the time, and that after you read this book, you may crave a different pace of fiction. I remember when I finished reading it, I had loved it so much, and I was thinking to myself, you know what, it might be time to read M for Malice by Sue Grafton. Wow, a flood warning issued until 9 a.m. Fingers crossed, some things might get rained out today, some concerts and things, but concerts taking place in churches never get rained out. They've always got a roof over their heads, very often an ornate stone roof. And in that echoing chamber, I will be singing weakly sometimes, strongly other times. When we return to this book, I want to talk about the physical object, and I want to talk about how I acquired it. Hey everybody, we're back. We were talking about Small Rain. Now, this is the first ever hardcover Garth Greenwell book I've ever bought. I've got paperbacks of the other two books. They're those picador ones that have the little, the short cover and the longer colored page underneath. I think, looking back at different Garth Greenwell books, I think the prettiest covers are probably, number one, What Belongs to You, because it's so suggestive with all the windows. Number two, Small Rain, because it's elegant and it has this really lovely, very appealing shade of blue that actually kind of is essential to you when you're getting a little bit like, not unpleasantly so, but like some claustrophobic in the book a little bit. It's nice to kind of close the book and have this sky color and this little jet trail, letting this like faint picture suggest to you something, having this like this sans serif text kind of just make you feel more neutral, at peace, in equilibrium. It's kind of like essential. And then also the texture of the book is pretty essential too. It reminds me of the texture on my Penguin John Ashbery Selected that has that kind of texture to it. You can see that the spine here has that kind of discoloration that comes from handling something with the corrosive, dirty hands that I always have. And then on the back, we've got blurbs from many writers that we all, read a lot. Phil Cly, I remember I read Redeployment, and my copy of Redeployment is signed. Looks like the cost was $28, $37 Canada. For a while, because I was so excited about this book, I briefly flirted with the idea of pirating it. I was like, what if I pirated a proof? Now, that's not good to do because you want to support your favorite authors and actually like give them, some support. So I did penance for those early thoughts of piracy by skateboarding down to a room of one's own and purchasing the hardcover, which was over in the like queer fiction section, because they've got a whole queer fiction section, which I wasn't expecting at first. I was just thinking that this would be out on the front, the most important book published in recent days, basically. But it was kind of tucked away a little bit. But I found it and I exclaimed, when I was buying it, I was like, it's finally here. And I don't think the person at the register was like, wanted to really be too jovial about it. Like, that's kind of cringe to go up with your book and be like, it's finally here, celebrate with me, although I did expect everybody in the store somehow to be like celebrating it. I expected to walk in and just see like streamers going off and everybody saying, oh my gosh, the new Garth Greenwell book is here. The new Garth Greenwell book is here party. That's what I was expecting. So I wound up with this hardcover and, we'll have to get into those notes and these notes later. I was thinking like I could just go through them and that might be a cool way to get back into the text of the book. You can see here there's a little bit of separation where this paper, it's touching. It's an aware, like the slight separation between these layers of the book kind of reminds me of the aortic stuff going on in the book. You've got these nice wide flaps that I was using as a bookmark for most of the time I was reading the book until I switched to this piece of paper because I just wanted more places to write down notes. Underneath that light blue area, is this very kind of a deeper royal blue, a hardcover book bound in paper like this. And you see the FSG logo there. And I personally think that an author of this stature deserves something on the front here. I guess GG is so sort of like memey now. Maybe GG is too like, people use it in chats and stuff to say good game, to basically facetiously be like, take the L. Small Rain, Garth Greenwell. You can see that this sans serif, it just has a different feel from the one on the cover. The one on the cover is a little bit more voluminous. There's more, it just feels a little bit more luxurious and a little bit more cozy and playful. This one is a bit cold. I do think that an author whose style is so stately oftentimes, although we have briefly talked about how the style of this book isn't quite as stately as the style of past books. But I think like an author of this stature should have the treatment where it's got like you have the embossed initials here on the front. You've got some cloth down here. You've got that kind of like shiny black, ink here with gold letters, like something like that. And I'm sure that, Garth Greenwell will eventually one day become like a Nobel Prize contender, basically, or on that level. These books will be seen as classics of the modern era, I think. Maybe they won't be your cup of tea, but they will be mine. And I do think that they will be reprinted in ever flashier editions. Or at least that's my hope. That's a fantasy I have. When the book was first announced online and it had a page on the FSG site, I was really excited to see that it was 300 pages because the past books that I bought were like 180, like 210 pages. And I was just so excited to have this much length to stretch out in. And starting the book, I was grateful to kind of discover out the gate that the style was more free-flowing. The blood in the veins was a little bit thinner, and you could kind of flow faster through it. I knew it was going to be an easy and immersive read, and it wasn't going to be as kind of, it was going to have a different pace from these books. And that pace seems appropriate to it as being a novel. These are all three being called, they're all three novels. Although this, I feel like this wasn't, did this have the subtitle a novel when it came out? I seem to recall that it was just Cleanness. Yeah, Cleanness, Garth Greenwell, just a work of fiction, You could really shelve it under short stories or as a novel. I think it works really beautifully as a novel. I was talking about how the structure of this, the nested structure of it, just really works, and it really holds together. I'm still really impressed by the way the structure of this is, like the solidity of the structure of this, and yet how wide-ranging the topics covered are. I was noticing a little bit of overlap between like the political, like the protest scenes in Cleanness and the general descriptions of the kind of background unrest that are in Small Rain. But yeah, I think in some interviews he calls all three of these novels. Six of one, half dozen of the other. I don't really care what you call them. But what I do care about is gloating about my nice hardcover book. Also, another thing while I'm here, this issue of The New Yorker, September 16th, a little bit after the book was released to give some time for the reviewer to read it, I guess. It depicts kind of me reading the book, honestly. I was on that sofa largely, and I had my feet up kind of like on a pillow on one of those tables, and I was kind of curled up like this. I didn't have cats around me. I wish I had this many cats around me, but anyway. I think anybody would covet this apartment. It's not so difficult to see why this particular reader is very contented. So now I've given some scattered first impressions and talked about the physical book and where I got it and what it was like to get it. I've talked about its physical edition kind of compared to these ones. It has the same type as the type in Cleanness, I think. Very, very similar. More similar to the type in the paperback of Cleanness. The What Belongs to You has a kind of a larger, more kind of classic vintage paperback kind of look to the type. So I've talked about some scattered first impressions, talked about the book as an object, and then I kind of want to like venture further into it. But first I want to congratulate myself on having said so much. Typically when I read books that I love to read, that really enter me, you know, I clam up, I don't talk. I mean, there's that video I made about the Tabucchi book a while back where I just said, I loved this so much, I won't dare talk about it. And I do have similar feelings to this book. There's kind of a like all or nothing mentality. Either I'll go through page by page or this was my feeling at the start, was that I enjoyed it so much and it seemed like it was so kind of complex and sort of breakdownable, but also like kind of unbreakdownable, like a solid whole that you can't really like dismantle easily, but that would reward dismantling. And I wanted to kind of just go through the whole thing and do like a giant 3-hour video or just say nothing at all. Because if you want some sort of like cursory information about the book, you can get that from any number of reviews that have been published and all of that. I feel like what I want to give you is a sense of what the book is like to hold and read. And then maybe anything I feel like might not have been covered in any reviews you might have seen just yet. This is a book, like I always say that I want to reread books, but the prospect of rereading this is actually like especially nice because this is such a medication. It's such an oxy hum, this book. It's such an IV drip. It's such a psychedelic. It has such an effect as a drug that it really feels like this is the drug to take if I ever want to observe life more closely, be a bit more grateful for things that go well, and nod toward mortality in a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm posturing as some sort of like person more courageous than I am. If you kind of want to humbly confront mortality and kind of have a boost around you to all of the like in the visuals around you, you know, in the beauty of your landscape, you would take a drug like this. And I feel like my sense, the solid sense of what drug this is, what kind of drug this is for me, what its side effects are on me, makes me feel very confident about wanting to reread it in the future. Confident that there will be some time when I am able to prescribe this book to myself, even more so than these other two books, because this is the experiences in this book are like, I love that they grade into unremarkability, you know? They grade into true, just everydayness, and that makes it feel very assimilable into just kind of your thinking about whatever it is you may be thinking about. Well, I've really changed tactic. I went from like lots of small sheepish cuts to long takes where I'm just talking about it at length. And that's because A, choir is done. I don't really feel like there's a time constraint on me now. And then B, I don't know. I've had coffee. Gosh, there's a wonderful part of this book that has to do with coffee. At one point, the narrator says he would kill for a cup of coffee. He talks to the nurses about coffee, you know? And there's this wonderful thing after he's received some medicine and gotten a little bit better, when he realizes he can have a cup of coffee. And there's they say, don't do the hospital coffee. Like, you're not going to want that for your cup. If you're going to have one, make it good. So he has Elle go get him a nice cup of coffee. And then when it comes and he has it, and like, I think he like moans with pleasure or something like that. It's just such a real thing. I mean, I identify with this book as someone who's like a hypochondriac about himself and his property. And as somebody who's a singer who reads deeply into music, someone for whom little glancing interactions are often blown up in my mind. I really relate to some sort of over-analytical quality that many of the encounters in this book have. But I also relate to it as a coffee drinker, as someone who does like to have his pulse quickened by coffee. I just feel like equally vulnerable to situations where I have blown up my arteries because I just needed my coffee that bad. I needed it to open up my throat, so to speak, to kind of get me talking voluminously. So this is also an interesting book to read as a coffee drinker. I think another way I relate to this book is as someone who's been to Iowa City. Iowa City is really kind of another character in the book, maybe. And Garth Greenwell has said in other interviews that his fictions often come from place. And of course, that means both physical places and then also like, I'm in a good place or I'm in a bad place sort of places, you know, internal states. But at the end of the book when, I don't want to give it away, but you basically see Iowa City in flashback, in a sense, when we're talking about the house that Elle and the narrator have bought and gone through all the aforementioned ordeals with, which are so vivid. I highly recommend reading this book. So you see Iowa City there in their neighborhood. And then you also see it toward the end. You get details about that detail about like how the kids playing on the street is part of the nostalgic appeal of the neighborhood that their house is situated in. There's lots of little sweet stuff like that that just makes this book really vivid and relatable. There's that term, relatable. I mean, relatable like a friend is relatable when your ears are open to them and they're kind of speaking freely and honestly. I think like it's kind of easy for someone who talks beautifully to be honest. Is that true? Another thing to look out for in this book is the kind of the way other languages, like the way the Spanish functions in this book, almost like an IV drip. Spanish terms like an IV drip that kind of refresh your sense of language as something that's learned and can be chosen and, you know, can be elected to be used, you know, along with other different languages. Your sense that you're kind of outside of it and inside of a language. Also as an IV drip because when you hear words in a different language, in a private language, like the words that Elle and the narrator make up, it's just a comfort medicine. I think that it would be cool to just, something I was thinking, I was kind of putting on my like scholar's hat or something, like if I were gonna start making notes for a larger essay about what I love about these Greenwell books, you know, if I was gonna make some sort of contribution to the literature, I was thinking about trying to make a giant index or compilation of when a character forgets a name for something, pointedly. Like, doesn't just forget a name for something, but says, I forgot what they said next and I never remember, you know, things of that nature. Because for a writer who's so concerned with memory and things that stick around in memory, it's just really interesting to have moments of forgetting, you know, be foregrounded and kind of stick out at you. And then I might also do an index of just moments when this master of English prose has recourse to specific words or catchphrases in another language. I think in Cleanness, if I recall correctly, things start to approach like an actual kind of polyphony. I think I think many writers who are just obsessed with like the beauty of language maybe like want to grade into polyphony. They love the idea that two threads can be woven together in language or something. Anyway, I don't know what I would say about it, but those are two potential like indices you could make in these books, like indices of first lines. And I know that I've talked in the past about how you can make like indices with Post-it notes on the inside back cover of a book. I generally have been thinking that like we should all, Leafy viewers and Leafy, like start to make indices in books we like. That should be like, maybe that should be like your third read of the book. First, get situated. Second, deeply enjoy, read in as deeply as you want to. On the third read, for, I guess, people who are interested in craft, start making your index. Like, start counting up the actual ingredients of the book, like instances where, there's a blowjob. I don't know. Just whatever you want to count up in the book, that whatever bricks you can identify in it. At first, that kind of seemed like a ridiculous task with books that are this seamless, but there are seams, there are breaks. This has its 3 sections. This has its 9 chapters. This has its 5 parts and epilogue. There are breaking points. There are places where you can kind of see, little starts and ends and classify what was selected to be looked at during those little sections. I'm generally very grateful to anybody who watches this video and enjoys it and sort of gets enjoyment from contemplating a book they may have just read or wanted to read, I basically want you to feel like, I want you to feel invited to read these books, and to read whatever you're reading. I'm a huge apologist, as we all know, for the physical, for enjoying the book just as a book. I think something that's interesting that happens in Small Rain is that there's these nice nods to how people who don't allow phones in bed in times of crisis, have a refreshed sense of what kind of a lifeline a phone is, like L forbids phones in bed, but the narrator knows that now that he's in trouble, L will be keeping the phone close for any sort of update that might happen, I think that, sometimes you get on your relative for taking too many pictures at an event or something, or like kind of being out of the moment, just being on their phone. But then that relative goes somewhere strange alone, and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm so glad they've built up this habit of just snapping these photographs, snapping things, stuffing things in their digital pockets. There are really many different stories in this book. There are many different stories in this book that are intense enough that you could say that they're basically the main story of the book. Like narrator and sister, narrator and G, narrator and L. Maybe like those are narrator and L is a bigger thread. Narrator and people at the hospital, narrator and their own body, narrator and language, and art generally. Just all kinds of different threads that are woven. Narrator and L and house, you can really track all of these different narratives, and they can really jump to the fore. I thought it was kind of like telling that the person who reviewed the book in the New York Times made a comment about how in the book nobody there is no discussion of who's going to be paying for the medical bills. There are some mentions of the medical bills piling up. Like, for instance, when the claustrophobia and the CT scan, another extremely, extremely magnificently vivid, virtuosic passage. Like there's in that passage, there's discussion of how if the narrator fails to do the scan the first time, later on they'll have to do it again, and not only will the schedule of them getting home be delayed, but also medical bills will pile up. But I just thought it was telling that the reviewer in the New York Times could even hear the absence of certain, like had run with the sort of financial thread in the plot so far that he was actually kind of coming up with things that could be discussed that weren't discussed. And that's like kind of proof of the reality and the continuity of that thread. Do you know what I mean? That ball is totally in the air and you feel it. and you kind of feel that it's flying somewhere, you know, even when it's not even being discussed in the moment. The narrator and his past is a more receded thread, but it's also there. You know, the stuff that you get to, and I don't want to spoil anything, but the stuff about the narrator's father and sister is very touching to me. Just another extremely touching kind of one of those things that the book does well to find and examine, which are those things that are like both totally unremarkable and the only remarkable thing, you know. You could either be awake to the wonder of these things that are like just everywhere, or you could ignore them. To kind of make a long story short, I'm looking at these notes, and there are just a couple things we're talking. I already talked about tracing the moments of forgetting, making an index. There's this phrase, nomen est omen, naming is destiny or something, that I think that I heard in this poetry podcast, and I kind of thought might be cool to use as a phrase in any essay where you talked about forgetting names. And on this sheet, I basically just have that, like, there's sections that are more Nicholson Baker-ish than others. And then basically I think elsewhere on these notes, I basically just have stuff from my life where I thought it might be good to do like a kind of Greenwellian treatment of them. When we went in the book where there's that lovely section about Snickers, and I thought that it kind of reminded me of something I might write about Pop-Tarts versus Toast-'em Pop-Ups. I'm having a big Toast-'em Pop-Ups moment right now. But I'll close. This is perfect to close on, I think. This note here, ink light on page 285, 288. Let's turn there. So do you see how the ink is kind of light there? There's a little part on the page. It's kind of difficult to see, but the ink has kind of like, there's a part where it's lighter, and it's like a little vertical line on the page, and it happens also on page 288 for me. And this is just an idiosyncrasy of my copy, but I thought it kind of resembled the little like line of light down the front of the book. And rather than try to explicate that as like some metaphor, I just want to kind of call that out as something totally unique to my read, unless others have noticed that those pages have similar, you know, lightness to their ink. I'll leave us on that image and say, you know, that I of course recommend this book, but I recommend it as a fan recommends it, with acknowledgement that it's especially my cup of tea, that I am biased toward it, that I like books that do this sort of thing, and also that I love books where that are low on plot and high and long on feeling, observation, life, pura vida, you might say, pure life, you know. Isn't that the name of like a drinking water brand? Anyway, and with that, I'm signing off. Everybody have a good day of reading. Everybody read.